Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Mr. Richard Thomas.
Those of you familiar with this series know that each of the programs from the Golden Age is hosted by a personality whose roots go back to the 1950s. Well, there may be some raising of eyebrows at my appearing as host for the 1959 production of A Doll's House, so in order to authenticate my credentials, I'd like to show you a clip of a very young Richard Thomas playing one of Nora's children from that production. Well, blink your eyes and I'm gone. Nevertheless, as an apprentice actor, I was very, very lucky to grow up surrounded by people like tonight's cast. Julie Harris, Christopher Plummer, Jason Robards, Eileen Heckert, and Hume Cronin. And of course, to be directed by a man like George Schaefer, who recalls the unique excitement of live television drama.
When those things were on the air, it was like being up in an early airplane, sometimes with a somewhat choppy motor, but it was exciting. It was a real high. It was the most sustained kind of crazy excitement that I think I've ever known. At the end of the 90 minutes, you'd be exhausted. You'd sort of settle down, take many an hour before you came down to earth. But it was challenging and it was rewarding, and I miss it terribly.
Live television was like being in the theater. We rehearsed. We had periods of rehearsal where we could break a play down, start working, putting it on its feet, learning it, moving it, and it. Outside of the audience, it was very close to theatrical work, I felt. I mean, I didn't even think about working for the camera. We felt like we gave our performance that we had rehearsed, what you do in a play. And for good or for worse, this is it. This is what we offer you. And it had continuity. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
It had a kind of theatrical excitement, all those television dramas that were live, because we were there on and we were doing it live. We weren't perfecting it.
I haven't seen it at all. I've never seen it because it was done live, and I never saw it. I lived through it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Julie Harris and myself, Jason, Chris, and the others, I suppose, will be seeing this show tonight for the first time, because when we did it live. Live. Yeah. I've been on a set where cast and crew will burst into applause after we complete a scene of maybe, a minute or two in length. But in The Doll's House, the actors had to go it for 90 minutes. No second takes. Well, it helped that they were young. Certainly I was at 8 years old. But there were tensions, and the tensions showed up, of course, in different ways. For instance, the night before this play was broadcast, the cast had a party. George Schaefer recalls how the party led to a rather hairy time the next day. Now, although he did not attend, he received a report from James Costigan, the writer who adapted this work.
I did get word from Mr. Costigan that when he left the party at a decent hour, sort of hinting, tomorrow the show's live, that he got much profanity and catcalls and hoots and howls from Chris and Jason, who were still drinking rather heavily. Well, the next day we got to the studio for the final dress rehearsal that afternoon. The show went on at 7:30 that night, and neither of the gentlemen had appeared yet.
And George Schaefer, who was directing, came to me and he said, because I said, what's the delay? What's the delay? And he said, Jason and Chris aren't here. We don't know where they are. They were out together all night and nobody can find them. I said, yeah, it can't be true. We have to. I said, what are you going to do? Well, they said, we're looking.
And of course, Julie, she's just a saint. She wouldn't say a word. She just went out, ahead with her makeup and everything. And I said, it's going to happen now or now. And this crew is sitting around and it'll all be fine. And Schaefer, who must have been dying inside, not saying a word. And finally, Jason rolled in. He was the first one. And then it took another hour, I think, to find Chris. How those two got through that performance. I've never seen so much perspiration in my whole life. I mean, up all night. And you can't believe they're such solid, sober citizens today, right? They were wild.
I think I found him a rather pretty girl that night or something, and I woke up very late in the morning, not probably having been terribly successful anyway, and two gone, and realized that, of course, they were all waiting for me down there. I'd never done that before. I really actually hadn't. I always was on time, even though I'd lived it up a little bit. But that time was unbelievable. And of course, ironically, it would be that very 19th century pure attitude of Ibsen's that made us probably be naughtier than ever.
And they finally came reeling in, having apparently not been to bed, having spent the night on the town. I remember Chris had a cut on his leg, I believe. Both of them were really terrible condition, and I think we're out to prove which one could give the best performance under those circumstances, which is never very good on the director or the rest of the cast. Oddly enough, as you see when you see the performance, it doesn't show very much. They probably both met their challenge, but it was an unnerving memory from those days.
I never got into fights. I was too much of a coward to get into fights, and I was too really good-natured to get into a fight. And if it did get violent, I would leave cowardly and in time to avoid the fight. I probably hit myself on a door or something stupid.
I'm still thinking about George Schaefer saying Chris came in with a gash on his lip. If he fell asleep in rehearsal, how could he know what went on after?
He used a wheelchair because he had a problem with his feet, his arches, I guess, and he didn't want to be on his feet all day long.
I found that in live television, where you're being 4 or more cameras and constantly walking on those awful hard floors, at the end of the day, I would be a basket case. So I very practically got myself a wheelchair. And it became my trademark for many years. I would literally direct in a wheelchair all day long, wheeling around, pretending I was a camera, making all my little notes, and getting up relaxed and refreshed at the end of it.
But in the afternoon, when he would watch the whole play, he would sit in one spot, and then he would begin to nod.
He always did. After lunch, he'd fall asleep while we were doing a run-through. So we just pushed him into an empty room with a lot of chairs, and he woke up in a dark room with just hundreds of chairs. It was a catering establishment on 2nd Avenue that we rehearsed in. So if he can do that, how can he say about Chris that he had a gash on his lip?
High tension, high jinks. But also in those golden days, high purpose. People cared deeply and with passion about their work. It was a wonderful atmosphere to grow up in as a young actor, and a unique opportunity to learn 2 crafts at once. We had to sustain the immediacy, the energy, the one-take quality of a live theatrical performance, and combine that with the numerous techniques of working in front of the camera. Those of us who were cutting our teeth in those days really had the opportunity of learning 2 techniques at once. It was extraordinary, and although the situation was more primitive than it is today, we were all pioneering the art of television as we know it now.
When we decided to do Ibsen's Doll's House on Hallmark in '59, I went back and read the existing translations and stage versions, and none of them suited us. The standard textbook one is too stuffy. The theatrical ones didn't seem right. And so I went to James Costigan, who was our favorite Hallmark writer, still is in most ways my favorite writer, and asked James if he would do a whole new translation for us. And he was primarily involved in writing originals. He had written that beautiful Little Moon of Walden the year before for us. But he said, all right, I'll take a crack at it. And we then hired a scholar in the Norwegian to translate it syllable for syllable, just the way Ibsen wrote it. And working from that, James Costigan came up with the version that you're showing again, which any number of Ibsen scholars said to me afterwards they found was the truest that they'd ever heard to the original play, those who could read the original Norwegian, which I cannot.
Oh, it's a wonderful play. I love that play. To me, A Doll's House is almost the greatest of Ibsen's plays, and very modern, because it's not just about ERA or anything to do with the sexes. It's really about people, and it's really a problem that never changes, that 2 people have to, who say they want to make their lives together, really have to struggle in order to do that. And if somebody, if one of the partners in a marriage is dishonest in a way, you know, about saying, well, this is my little wife, and she can't do anything, and she's so precious and darling, and keeps her like a little doll, well, something is bound to happen to that, because she's a human being just as he is. I think it's a wonderful play. I love the way, you know, where Nora keeps saying, I know it's going to be all right. I know that Torvald, I'm waiting for the miracle. Because he's as human as any of us. And when he realizes that he will have to go to prison, that she's asking him to go to prison for her. She wouldn't allow him to do it, but she's expecting him to say, oh, don't worry, darling, I will take the blame. And he doesn't. He doesn't love her that much, which makes her say, oh, yes, so it's not the way you said it was. Yes. Then the door slam, and she leaves really to discover herself, which is what we all do.
You'll see no car crashes tonight. Scenes will last longer than 30 seconds or a minute. But what you will see, preserved on black and white kinescope, is a piece of television history, brought back for you to enjoy. Here, for the second time ever on national television, is the live performance, as seen on that night, the 15th of November, 1959, of Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House.